Day 21. Today I finished the chapter called The Cattle. One recurring theme that is presented is the concept that for those that are unbelievers, giving them signs will not help them to become believers. In verse 109 it says, "They solemnly swear by God that if a sign be given them, they would assuredly believe in it. Say, signs are only vouchsafed by God. And how can you tell? Even if a sign be given them, they may still not believe." I think this verse is very, very true. Personally, when I hear people say that they hear things from God or God is telling them what to do, I get very skeptical because how do you know that it's from God? How do you know that certain events are not just coincidences? And how can you tell that you are only doing certain things because you want to do it, not because God has told you to do them? This verse also reminds me of Jesus, and when he performed many miracles, people did not believe in him as recorded in the New Testament. I think we often think that seeing is believing, which may be true to a certain extent, but sometimes when we do believe something, we don't act upon it. A non-religious example would be eating healthy, sleeping early, exercising. We all know that those are good things, but in moments of temptations or out of laziness, we choose to eat unhealthy, we choose to sleep late, we choose not to exercise. Another recurring theme is that one of the most evil things you can do is to lead people astray from God, to make up lies about God and cause them to believe in those lies. In verse 144 of this chapter, it says, "Who is more wicked than he who in ignorance invents a falsehood about God to lead people astray? God does not guide the wrongdoers." This verse talks about people who accidentally lead people away from God, but there are also other verses that talk about people who deliberately lead people away, and my interpretation is that it's considered one of the more evil sins. Day 22 of reading the Quran. Today I read the chapter called The Heights. This chapter revisits the story of Adam and gives details that were not presented before. In verse 12 it says, "Why did you not prostrate yourself when I commanded you?" he asked. "I am nobler than he replied. "You created me from fire and you created him from clay." In this part, God asked Satan why he did not prostrate himself before Adam, and Satan's response was that he was made from fire. So I guess angels are made from fire and humans were made from clay. Angels also exist in the Bible, and I've never really thought about where they came from. I think I just assumed that they existed when God existed, but I guess according to the Quran, angels are fashioned from fire. This is a little bit off topic, but I was told that there is a book called the Book of Enoch, which goes into more details about creatures, I guess you could call them, such as angels and devils and things along those lines. So I am definitely planning to check that book out. A little after this part, starting in verse 19, we revisit the story about Adam eating fruit from the forbidden tree. My question to this part, and I think I've asked this question before, but I forgot the response I got from my pastor, is why did God put this tree in the garden in the first place? Why put this temptation there when he could have easily removed it or not put it there in the first place and have it be a source of temptation for Adam? It's easier not to give in to a temptation by removing a temptation rather than trying to resist it. Maybe the argument is that by putting this tree there, God gives us free will, or at least he gave Adam the free will to make the decision to choose to obey or to not obey God. The next thing I want to discuss is the story of Tammuz and a she-camel. It starts in verse 73, and it's about this camel that was sent from God. The instructions were that this camel should not be harmed, but the elders of the city did not obey, and they decided to kill the camel. Because of their actions, there was an earthquake and all the people died. I'm not exactly sure what to make of this story. I'm not sure what my thoughts are, but I thought it was an interesting story, and I finally got to know more about the significance of the person named Tammuz. Day 23 of reading the Quran. Today I finished the chapter called The Heights. One interesting thing that I was introduced to in this chapter are beings known as jinn, spelled Jinn. According to Google, jinn is an intelligent spirit of lower rank than the angels, able to appear in human and animal forms and to possess humans. They appear in verse 179, which says, "We have predestined for hell a multitude of jinn and humans." I have never heard of jinn before. I guess the biblical equivalent would be evil spirits. This verse opens a whole can of worms on questions I have for so many different topics. First is that since jinn is ranked below angels, what other beings or creatures are also included in this ranking? So my understanding as of right now is God, and then angels, and then jinn, and then humans. Animals are probably ranked lower than humans. Are there any other beings that are also ranked? Also, this word predestined is used, so does God know in advance who goes to paradise and who ends up in fire? The next verse I want to bring up is verse 205. It says, "When the Quran is recited, listen to it in silence that you may be shown mercy." I've noticed that the Quran self-references itself multiple times, and this is just one of the many times that I've read it doing that. I just find it a bit odd because it's not something that I really see happening in the Bible. I think the most self-reference that the Bible does is to say that this is the word of God, but it doesn't really say the Bible. Day 24. Today I read the chapters called The Spoils and the chapter spelled Hijr, which I searched up the pronunciation, but I know that I'm not pronouncing it right, so I'll just spell it out. Let's start with The Spoils. This chapter has a lot of rules on what believers should do when they are at war. The first interesting that I noticed is that if you have any spoils that you have taken from war, you have to give 1/5 of whatever you receive and dedicate it to God. I thought the 1/5 was interesting. 1/5 is quite a lot. I think in the Bible it's usually 1/10. The reason for doing this is that God gives them victory. He is the one that allowed them to defeat their enemies. Another interesting thing I noticed is that patience is a virtue. In verse 45 it says, "Have patience. God is with those that are patient." I think patience is a virtue in many different religions. In Christianity, patience is one of the fruit of the spirits. I don't have too much knowledge on Buddhism, but I'm pretty sure it's also a characteristic that is praised. A few lines down, I learned that a duty of angels is to carry the souls of unbelievers. I am fascinated by all things angels and devils and things along those nature. I guess one role of angels is to act as transportation for the unbelievers when they die physically on earth and enter fire. Now let's talk about the next chapter. In this chapter, we see that Satan submits himself to God. He is afraid of God. In verse 35, God curses Satan and says, "Get you hence," said he, "you are accursed, and the curse shall be on you till judgment day." Satan's response is, "Lord," he said, "reprieve me till the day of resurrection." Because Satan refused to obey God, he is punished by God, but he is allowed to live and do his thing until the day of resurrection. We see that Satan actively goes around and tempt people. He tries to lead people away from God. It says, "Lord," said Satan, "since you have thus tempted me, I will seduce those on earth. I will surely tempt them all, except those among them who are your faithful servants." This part was so interesting to me because it shows that Satan will try to tempt those who are easily tempted. For those that are faithful, those that take their relationship with God seriously, that try to obey God, Satan won't try to tempt them because he knows that it's more difficult for them to be tempted, which is very, very clever. God's response to what Satan said is this. He said, "This is my straight path. You shall have no power over my servants, only the sinners who follow you. They are all destined for hell. It has 7 gates, and through each gate they shall come in separate bands." The 7 gates phrase struck out to me. I initially thought of Dante's Inferno, in which he talks about the 9 circles of hell, but I'm pretty sure that's a different thing. I'm not too sure what the 7 circles refer to. Actually, is it like Dante's Inferno with the 9 circles of hell? Someone commented that the more I read the Quran, the more answers I'll get, but my experience is that the more I'm reading it, the more questions I have. I have noticed that sometimes there are more details about the same events or the same people in different chapters, so maybe I'll get more information about the 7 gates in another chapter.